Internet. My name is Mark and welcome down to the den. And today I have another book review. I have been reading the SunBearer Trials. I don't have the physical book anymore. I returned it in order to get the audiobook so that I can actually finish it.
More on that later.
I want to give you my best kind of spoiler-free pitch for the book with some of my thoughts and impressions with it, and then kind of showing you my work as to why I have some criticisms and see some faults in it. But first and foremost, I do believe that this is a good book. I can totally see that this book being someone's Harry Potter. I can see this being someone's Hunger Games. I can see this being someone's Divergent. You know, it's just some things didn't land with me, and then the reason why I even went out of my way to get the audiobook just so I can finish reading the rest of the novel speaks to the fact that there are some great things in the book, and I want to preference that from the get-go. I'm not going to just take a dumpster fire on this book. I actually do genuinely believe that this book has some great qualities and is good, especially for the YA audience that it's built for. But I do believe that there are some criticisms to be had, and I hope I don't offend anyone. But here we go. Here's for the spoiler-free part. Welcome to Reino del Sol, where the gods walk among us and dedicate their lives to protecting and serving us. Home to the SunBearer Trials, where the gods gather once every 10 years to fend off the
Dark forces of the betrayer god that wish to oppress us from amongst the stars.
By having their children who are handpicked by Sol to participate in the trials, and for one of them to have the honor as a sacrifice to reinvigorate and power the Soul Stones for 10 more years, thus protecting Reino del Sol until the next SunBearer Trials. Our story follows our boy Teo as the self-identified Spunky Kid, a lowly jade semidios, which is a demigod, who is not quite human, but definitely not as divine as the superior gold semidioses who are praised across all the continents as heroes and saviors of the people. As a child of the jade god Quetzal, and despite his divine heritage, is still trying to figure out where is his place in the world. That story ramps up and goes full tournament arc a la My Hero Academia, where Teo becomes one of the first Jades ever, as in since the prologue of the beginning of the world ever, to be picked to compete in the trials, with all the YA campiness that comes with the tropes that ensue from there. If that sounds anywhere up your alley, I would recommend giving this book a try. I absolutely love the Latin-inspired parts of the world building, outside of the overtly shoved in modern Americanisms that will be very blatant to anyone reading the book. I know why they are there for some of the jokes and stuff like that, but I'll get into that later. However, there are great character moments and developments that pay off by the end of the book, and a lovely little twist of the knife, as it were, that leads directly into the second book of the duology, which was very nice. And overall, this is a fun YA romp from someone who is not writing a typical Western fantasy, which if you're like me and get kind of caught up in some of the verbosity of the prose, that's a $10 word, I would recommend getting the audiobook instead and listening to it at about 1.25 or 1.5 times speed. I promise it completely turned the book around for me and got myself out of what would be the rendering lag I had in my thought sack. Overall, I would give this a 3 out of 5 stars, and if you're curious about how I rate things, here you go. And now, I showed a green screen for this video, and that's the truth. Okay, some of my criticisms about the book are sporadic. They're here and over there, and some little nitty tidbits, but overall, I do genuinely appreciate the book. I feel like it's a well conceptualized idea. And then the fantasy premise, I love the fantasy premise. I love all the fantasy stuff. That was fantastic. I loved it. I want to see so much more of that. But then it feels like the author is relatively new, and also this may have been one of their earlier works or even like later work that was rushed. Right, either from a author standpoint or from maybe an editor standpoint. Who knows how that, how their whole system worked to get the book published. But I know relatively nothing about the author. I didn't even know who Aiden Thomas was before reading this book. And the interesting thing is I didn't know they had anything else other than the beginning of the book was reviews about the other books that they had written, which I don't know if that's a weird thing or if that's just common in publishing today. My literacy is the scope of my literacy. It kind of seemed like a weird thing to like brag about other stories instead of like listing reviews about this story that I'm about to be reading. So, but that's not gripe or criticism. I'm just genuinely curious. I don't know if that's like a normal thing that authors do, or is that something that's kind of like a cop out because they didn't get good reviews for this book. I don't know. But to start off with, there are some pretty amazing elements to it. I love the whole Latin American pantheon. The gods themselves are well conceptualized, their personalities, their traits, their governance over different aspects of the world. And, their names are all fun, and even better if you think about their Spanish context. I really do like the protagonist's mother, who is Quetzal, who is basically the goddess of birds. But my favorite one is Pan Dulce, which obviously is deity of food and makes fantastic food, like great food. That's amazing. And some of my gripes and some of my criticisms about the book are I don't like the beginner's prologue, right? The kind of the originating gripe against sci-fi fantasy is to have these enormous prologues that give you a whole bunch of detail up front that kind of ruins the surprise about your world building later on in the book. And I feel like that definitely happened here. You get this big long prologue about Sol and Tierra and their creation of their deific children, and the deific children begat and begat and begat. And so now you have this world and this continent that is ran by all these gods who are the children of these other gods. And then you jump right into chapter 1, and Teo pulls out a cell phone. I don't know, man. And then there was a very, very lovely dialogue between Teo and the shopkeeper. I thought that was very humanizing. But again, those first early chapters just really kind of like mullied the idea of this like grand epic fantasy prologue that you gave me. No, just layer that into the rest of the story so that you can start off and you can be like, oh, is this Earth? Is this someplace else? Is this just fantasy, generic world A, B, or C? But then the cell phone and the idioms and stuff like that, and it just seems juxtaposed. But I can see that being a pro instead of a con for some younger readers who. But then the writing and the prose itself was fine. It was good. It was written like your typical YA fantasy, right? Not terrible. At least this one, I don't know. Maybe there's just books out there that are just awful. Maybe I haven't read them because I haven't read a lot. But this one's just seemed fine. It seemed very. The only gripe I have about the prose was that it was detailed, like a lot, like too much detail, and even in between dialogue, right? In between there would be interjections of like very high detail, and I just wanted to get the conversation done, right? And so I feel like myself, I render things in my brain space, right? Or like I'm reading and then visualizing, and it's trying to play in my head. But then when you go into like a hyper focus, that hyper detail in between dialogue, I just hit lag, I just hit buffer. And so I really struggled with the beginning of this book, the first couple of chapters, because there was just a lot of interjected line by line prose that slowed down each individual scene to the point that it felt like I was reading, right? I wasn't just being captivated or being consumed. Again, another thing that somebody could probably see as a pro, because it is hyper detailed. If you can't imagine that, having the author tell it explicitly is probably fine. It's probably great for some people. It just wasn't for me. The way I worked around that was getting the audiobook and then listening it at like 1.5 speed. Narrator did great during the audiobook, and even at 1.5 speed, the dictation, fantastic. Narrator dude, I don't know your name. Your name's going to be right here. You did fantastic. And then the story itself, right? I didn't like the idea of and this is specifically what I know is a trope in YA, of the hero is different, even though there's no real good reason why he should be, right? The reason why I say the hero is different, even though he shouldn't be, is because he grows up in this world in which every 10 years, one of the children of the gods is sacrificed. Every 10 years. It's this big global event. It's this big thing, right? There's no explicit reason at the jump for our hero not to love it, not to be like engrossed into it, right? Not to at least condone it, you know. And I feel like it's not adequately explained, other than he's just an edgy kid and he's getting the point of view of the audience, right? He's has the shock and the awe of the audience member who's reading the book. But if he's just a kid in this world, give me the reason why he thinks this way, why he thinks differently than everyone else. And we don't get that, especially from the beginning. I don't think so. I feel like I'm rambling, but yeah, so it's just one of those things where like there's just a slight detailed aspects to different things, and then the modern Americanisms and the technology and stuff that's just kind of shoehorned. Like I wanted more magic in this fantasy realm. I wanted more of that, and instead in modern day where my story's taking place, it's just America. And then they kept bouncing me back to California, and I was just like, I grew up in Vegas. I've seen enough of California. I didn't want more of that. I wanted more of this cool gods among men world building, right? And this is, all the mysticism that was going on. And I feel like I just didn't get enough of that. I do feel like I have hope for the second book to be a lot more of that because of spoilers. But then as the story goes on, you kind of get mollified into the mini hero arc. And I feel like it really could have been a lot more of its own, a lot more of its unique, if it wasn't just kind of just like married into this idea. I feel like the characters themselves, fantastic. I feel like this is probably where the author shines, right? Where your characters are really good. Your plot is at least cohesive. It's streamlined, and then everything else in the background is just there to supplement the characters and your plot, right? And I feel like that's kind of what this story was, and I wanted a lot more of the world building, and I wasn't really satisfied. But I feel like it's a little bit too Pan Am for me, right? Like you got the circular, semicircular world area with the capital in the middle and all of your different chunks of society in these nice little pie shapes around. And I feel like that's just kind of, I guess that's a trope nowadays. When you get to the interacting with the environments, and you get to interacting with the world itself through the eyes of Tale, I feel like that really shined through. I feel like he has this one kind of edginess to him, and the ulterior perspectives from other characters, even though we don't get their perceived perspectives, right? We don't jump into other people's heads. They voice their opinions enough that you start getting various perspectives of the world around you, and I think that's great. I don't have that many like intrusive gripes about the story itself. I feel like the author wanted to create a story in which they were represented, and that other people like themselves could be represented. Your hero, your protagonist is trans, coming from a trans author, perfectly fine. Make the stories in which you wish to see yourself in. Fantastic idea. And I feel like that's a great and wonderful thing. This book, where it lacks is from experience and or drafting and editing, right? And I feel like that's only going to improve with time with this author. This is the level in which I would deem credible, although I'm very easily sated when it comes to entertainment. I rarely go to a movie that I dislike. I consume a lot of short stories. I consume a lot of internet stories. Like my bar for like prose and making sense is down here, right? It's down here. And so everything else above that, I feel like is great. It's fun. As long as the concepts and stuff is executed fairly well, which I believe in this book is. The parts of the world building that that pertain to this specific story, especially with the gods and our character being a semideus, is literally fleshed out really well, and I loved it. I only got hung up on a scene by scene basis, basically because of rendering lag in my own brain space. But that could be easily edited out, and or the skilled author can more concisely convey those details elsewhere in the scene, right, or in their prose. And it's a lovely thing. And I feel like if your inclination is to hate it because of who the author is and who they represent in their books, you just stop. Just know it's a story. It's a story, and it's a fantasy story, and it's as real as any other fantasy story. It's as it's as pertinent to human and the story of us as any other one. And I feel like this is a great step in the direction of toppling that giant tower of Western fantasy that's been a dead horse, so that we can resurrect it once more a few years down the line to beat it to death again. And so I think that I look forward to continuing this series. If you just want to follow along on my journey to read more books, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more of these things. Hopefully it doesn't take me a month at a time to make these videos, but who knows? I am not great at this yet. If you have any suggestions or recommendations of your own, please feel free to comment in the doobly-doo comment section down there. I'll probably pick them out and read them. I have just a little bit of a list right now of what's on the pipeline for me to read and do reviews about, but that may change if you just recommend something really good and I start seeing attractions or something on a recommendation or something like that. But yeah. And as always, remember to have a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, or just a good day. See you, Internet. It's been a few weeks. It has not been a month since I started trying to make this video and had several crashes and computers and had to wipe my entire video and had to start this video over twice. But no, I think this video. Hi. So stupid.